Who hasn't dreamt at some stage of being a train driver? Hello again. Thanks for joining us for World Around Us. Tonight, the first of a two-part Brisbane-produced special that's just chock-a-block with local history and human interest. It's 130 years since Queensland Railways were born. Since then, they've played a vital role in the development of our great state. Transport is just so essential. Where the railways went, there were the industries, the jobs, the people moved, there were the families. Tonight's hour is just chock-a-block with real, fair income Queensland history. I do hope you enjoy part one of The Spirit of Steam.
On July the 31st, 1865, the railway revolution steamed into Queensland history.
The state's first rail line, from Ipswich to Biggs Camp in the Lockyer Valley, opened to lavish celebration.
4 trains ferried 500 guests to the festivities. Parliament took 2 weeks' holiday to mark the grand occasion. The arrival of the railway age was decreed a triumph for the infant colony, but not before it had deeply divided the state. 6 years earlier, in 1859, the newly formed government of Queensland had faced a dilemma: how to open up more than 1.5 million square kilometres of remote country. Roads of the day were dirt tracks, reduced to impassable quagmires when it rained. 130 drays bogged on the Drayton Road during the wet spell in 1863. A more reliable link between farm and market was desperately needed. In that year, Works Minister Arthur McAllister brought in a law paving the way for a government railway. A great success elsewhere in the empire, the rail revolution was the best hope of spearheading development west. But where would the railway start? Though Brisbane was the seat of government, Ipswich, as head of navigation, was deemed a more suitable origin. The fledgling government also needed to build its railway as cheaply as possible. Irish engineer Abraham Fitzgibbon had the answer. He proposed a light railway of 3-foot 6-inch gauge, smaller than the standard gauge adopted by New South Wales and less costly to construct. Many considered the suggestion outrageous. Nowhere in the world was narrow gauge used on a main line. Surely trains travelling above 15 miles an hour wouldn't be safe. But the cynics were no match for penny-pinching politicians. Railway historian Greg Hallam.
It was a novelty, it was an experiment from the word go. That it hadn't been tried anywhere else in the world on such of this scale. But again, it was a question of politics and it was a question of finance, trying to keep money down, trying to get as much railway from as little money as possible.
The issue sparked Queensland's first political crisis. Parliament split, forcing an election over the railways. In the end, Fitzgibbon's controversial proposal was accepted. A year later, the first narrow-gauge government main line opened for business. Commissioning the line, Governor Bowen predicted,
"The first railway will prove the pioneer of many, enduring throughout the great future of the colony."
But a sceptical civil engineer named Doyne labelled the light railway, with its smaller engines,
"A well-bred pony which will trot as long as you don't overburden him."
A century of hard labour has proved Doyne wrong, but the name, Pony Railway, has stuck. The first leg of the Great Southern and Western Railway complete, the line began ascending the Toowoomba Range. Shaped by the muscle of hundreds of English and Irish labourers, it was an engineering marvel. 47 bridges, 9 tunnels, and 126 curves. Conditions were harsh and the pay pitiful. 7 meagre shillings, or about 70 cents for a 10-hour day.
Many of the agitators for an 8-hour day had come from England from the 1860s, and virtually the first 8-hour strike here in Queensland, the colony of Queensland, or in Australia itself, actually took place on that range.
The Great Southern and Western Rail Line finally arrived in Toowoomba in 1867, a 3-day coach trip reduced to 4 hours by train. But still, this line was contentious. When Sunday rail services were introduced, the church leaders of the day demanded an end to the sacrilege of trains running on the Sabbath.
Religious scandal, political crisis and industrial unrest failed to stop the railway revolution. Before the new Southern Line was complete, Rockhampton was demanding its own railway. Copper discovered at Peak Downs and the political pull of rich graziers were enough to persuade the government. A silver spade turned the first sod on construction of the Great Northern Railway, but the title would prove farcical. In 1867, a short rail line opened from Rockhampton to Westwood, the junction of 4 dusty country roads.
The line to Westwood, I think it was recalled at one stage, a pair of rusty rails running towards a gum tree. But eventually the government did take on the task of building a railway from Westwood further west out to Emerald and those places, Barcaldine and Blackwater. And in many ways, the archetypical Queensland Railway was built from there.
Another quarter century passed before the line stretched through the heart of Queensland to become what we know today as the Central Railway. But Rockhampton remains fiercely proud of its railway past. Since 1899, a rail line has bisected Denison Street in the city heart. Today, trains still enjoy right of way, to the impatience of motorists and the delight of children. An era of prosperity in the late 1880s saw the railways boom in Queensland. The government borrowed £10 million, in today's money around $2.5 billion, to fund the expansion.
Virtually we are mortgaging the future prosperity of the state against the railway. I think in many ways that the tie between Queensland and the railways itself was even forged closer at that point, because in many ways we're still paying off debts from over a century ago now, still with the money that we earn.
By 1910, Queensland had nearly 6,000 kilometres of rail line, more than any other state. The system was finally threaded together in 1924 by the longest state-owned railway in Australia, from Brisbane to Cairns. The undisputed rulers of this vast rail network were the iron horses. The great-granddaddy of steam engines made the inaugural run on the state's first rail line in 1865. To the Irish navvy's delight, the locomotive was named Fara Balach, Gaelic for "get out of the road." It was one of 4 A10 class engines shipped from England to the new colony. By 1914, the fleet had grown beyond 600 and many new recruits were built locally. A manufacturer at Brisbane's Kangaroo Point delivered a new engine by laborious means. Horse teams laid a section of portable track end on end, the loco inching along until it reached the nearest permanent rail line. Steam engines were the pride and joy of the men who drove them, fussed over and pampered like a well-loved pet. And at day's end, stored away in a fashion unique to Australian and American railways. This locomotive roundhouse at Rockhampton is one of the last still standing. In the early 1900s, the air here would have been thick with steam and smoke, as 52 engines were cleaned and bedded down in the circle of bays. Today, the roundhouse is used for administrative services. But listen closely, and you can almost hear the crank of the turntable and the ghostly hiss of a weary locomotive home from a hard day's work. Next, life on the road for
in 25 years.
the Australian nation. The far north became a military zone, and Queensland railways were enlisted into battle. trains moved thousands of troops and tons of war materials during those anxious years. Railway staff were supplied with gas masks. Air raid shelters sprang up near suburban railway stations. This one at Park Road Station in Brisbane still stands. Where terrified passengers once huddled in the darkness, spiders and moths have now made their homes.
Fears of the railways falling into enemy hands were very real. Here at Brisbane's old main depot, there was a magazine of explosives. Instructions were that, should the Japanese invade, every single locomotive was to be destroyed.
That drastic step was never needed, but the demands of the war machine took their own toll. Locomotives were pushed to the limit. So too, the men who drove them. After the war, railway station honour boards gave tribute to the rail employees who fought on foreign soil. But there was little recognition for those who stayed behind. In war, the sons of steam were unsung heroes. In peacetime, they were public icons. Characters, cap and vest. They were the envy of all who longed for the freedom of the road.
The days when children would run to the rail fence and wave to us as we proudly passed by with a roar like thunder.
It was a rough and filthy workplace.
To shovel coal into my hungry mouth in that swaying, lurching cab was an art on its own.
But to driver and fireman, the cab of a steam loco was home away from home.
Quite often, when you get to the top of a hill, you put the billy in, and you couldn't stop. Then they make a cup of tea and have a biscuit that's going along.
Cooking on the banjo, or fireman's shovel, was often the only way to get a hot meal. Retired driver Bob Norman explains.
They used to give you 15 minutes to have a meal, so that wasn't long to understand. You used to have to cook around meals on the shovel. Come along and get to a town where there's a butcher and go and get some sausages or something, steaks, and then we'd cook it on the shovel, a bit of bread, and away we go. Beautiful.
Oh, that age of steam when just about every young boy and probably half the young girls too dreamt of being a train driver. Well, here's my chance. And to introduce me to this one, the Blue Baby, here's driver John Bertrand. G'day, John.
Hello, Frank.
Good to meet you. Yeah. Now, tell me a little bit about this loco.
Well, this is a blue tank engine, a DD-17. Was built in the Ipswich workshops in 1952. It's slightly different to the normal steam engine that doesn't have a tender. You've got, on either side of your boiler, you've got these large tanks which contain water for the boiler. Between them, you've got the main boiler, which generates the steam for the cylinders, which is, you've got one on either side of the engine, your big cylinder, and naturally inside you've got your big piston, which is connected to your main driving rod. Here's your main driver, which in turn connects to your main driving wheel via the big crank here, and that turns the main driver, which is in turn connected to two other drivers via coupling rods. Consequently, you've got three drivers on each side of the engine propelling the unit.
And we all know about the chimney.
The chimney, well, after your steam has done its work on the cylinders, it's of no more use. It's exhausted to the atmosphere through the smoke box, along with the gases and smoke from the fire, and it goes out through the chimney to the atmosphere.
I like the nifty little thing you had for when you had a slippery ride.
Oh, yeah, that's...
And you used to lose traction,
right,
you used to let down a little bit of sand.
Yeah, you had to have the sand. That's gravity-fed sand. It's held in a container up the top. And if the wheels slipped, which they often did in wet or dewy weather, or sometimes with grasshoppers on the line, it's hard to believe, but you get a plague of grasshoppers, they would slip.
Well, I suppose, John, you'd better show me what goes on inside the cab.
Yep, all right.
I suppose the first thing's the firebox, isn't it?
That's correct. That's on your left-hand side there.
And this is the job?
That's right. That's the fireman's job.
So he just had to keep this...
to keep the fire going all the time. Keep the steam pressure up for the driver.
How many tons used to shovel in an hour?
Well, probably on this engine, this tank engine, 4 tonne of coal did last an 8-hour shift.
Must have been hard, Yakka.
It wasn't easy. Well, you had to be able to stand up while she was bouncing around on the old track and that.
You just keep it going.
Yeah. It was a bit of a battle, a bit of a contest all the time between the old fireman and the steam gauge.
Well, we better just shut the firebox. Now, John, how do you know that there's enough water in the engine?
Well, you've got 2 gauge glasses situated on the front of the boiler, left and right, and they're protected by heavy glass, and they give you the level of water in the boiler.
And the fireman had to watch that?
He's got to watch that. He's responsible for water and steam. The fireman's, that was his job.
Now, how did you know that you had enough steam ready to drive?
Well, you've got a steam gauge here, showing around about 150 now, pounds per square inch. Normally this one would run at about 175 pounds a square inch. So steam pressure.
We're ready to go then, are we?
Yeah, if you like.
What's the procedure?
All right, this is what you call your reversing lever. We'll send you either forward or backwards. We go forward. You move that forward, it's in forward gear. This is your regulator. You open this regulator. Naturally, you'd have to take your brakes off first. Open the regulator like this, which will allow steam from the main pilot valve at the top of the boiler into the cylinders, where the steam will do its work on the pistons.
Now, you told me there's something you always have to do
Correct.
before you start.
That's right. You must blow the whistle.
My job?
Yes, you can blow it.
Here we go.
That was well
away
done,
we go.
Frank. That's, we're off now. Down the track.
They say often that it was the romantic age of steam. Do you think that's the right word?
Well, I suppose when you think back on it, you do, but you might have thought differently if you were chugging along about 1:30 in the morning and you'd been going for 12 hours or something, but I suppose they were romantic days, you know. They're just something that's belongs to the past, you know.
Having survived depression and war, the iron horses succumbed to progress. Making way for the mighty diesels, steam engines faded away in the late 1960s. Some relics became playgrounds to children who never knew their reign. But there's one old boiler still hard at work after all these years, a stone's throw away from the birthplace of the railways. At Grantchester Sawmill, a retired steam locomotive has found new employment. This boiler, powering the Gillam family mill, is the remains of number 922, a C-17 class engine which ran the Ipswich line. These days, Old Faithful devours sawdust instead of coal. But there's one piercing reminder of her former life on the road. The engine's whistle sounds smoko every day. Next up, the engine. The arteries of Queensland's rail system have pumped the lifeblood of commerce across the state. Early mixed trains were so named because they ferried people and produce to country towns. When passenger services improved, the goods train took on the task of hauling crops, timber, cattle and sheep.
This time I'm on my way to Townsville with my load of goods. It's a long journey, over 800 miles. But for a goods train engine to pull 500 tons, 800 miles, it's just my usual 3 days' work.
For many years, Brisbane's Roma Street was the dispatch point for produce to all corners of the state.
From the busy city, merchandise of all sorts and sizes comes to be trucked. Big, heavy loads that often need a whole truck to themselves are unloaded and loaded by the huge traveling train.
50 years on, freight operations have shifted out of the city to this massive terminal at Acacia Ridge. In an area the size of 3 football fields, a fleet of forklifts busily loads wagons to bursting point. Everything from beer to brooms, departing daily to destinations all over Queensland. Once the train had no rival when it came to hauling goods. But an ingenious system is helping today's railways compete with the flexibility of road transport. This ordinary-looking semi-trailer is really rolling stock in disguise. First, the road railer's triple axle slides forward. Then the body of the vehicle is raised on airbags. The trailer is positioned over a set of bogie wheels and lowered into place. Once locked onto the bogies, the trailer's tyres retract like the wheels of an aircraft after takeoff. Steel legs support the wagon until it's coupled onto a special towing frame. The road railer is now ready to be hauled north by rail. At its destination, it'll transform again for the rest of the journey by road. Freight earns millions of dollars each year for the railways. But this is by far the biggest moneymaker. Delivering the black gold of central Queensland to the rest of the world is one of the state's wealthiest industries. The railways provide the link between coal mine and port. 20 trains every 24 hours load up with coal from 9 mines in the central Bowen Basin. Then begin a long journey to export terminals at Dalrymple Bay and Hay Point near Mackay. En route to the coast, the mighty coal trains descend the treacherous Connors Range, scene of some spectacular and costly derailments. On the way down, the leading engine maintains 40 kilometres an hour. Even at that steady pace, a 100-wagon train weighing more than 7,000 tonnes takes half a kilometre to pull up. To ensure the driver stays alert, a console button must be pressed at regular intervals, or the brakes engage automatically. More than 70 million tonnes of export coal flows to the coast each year. But the focus for coal hasn't always been in central Queensland. In the 1800s, Ipswich coalfields supplied the steam shipping trade in Brisbane. A branch line was built from Oxley to South Brisbane, where extensive wharves were completed by 1884. Steaming down to the wharves via a tunnel beneath Vulture Street, a stream of trains hauled coal in wooden hoppers. This last surviving example was rescued off the bonfire by the Railway Historical Society.
Over the years, oil replaced coal as fuel and bunkering declined. The once busy South Brisbane wharves were demolished in 1974. Now, peaceful bikeways and footpaths hug the river.
In the water, a trace of the past remains. These massive concrete pillars are the footings of steam-driven cranes which once towered over the wharves. Next up, a railway is more than rolling stock. At one time, more than 30,000 men and women served the Queensland Government Railways. One of them was 97-year-old Gilbert Benyon. His cherished photographs recall 50 years, 9 months and 7 days of service at 35 stations.
Yes, 5 years I was at that station.
In 1914, Gilbert joined up as a railways clerk the week Townsville's grand new station opened. His 21st birthday was spent on a remote siding between Townsville and Ayr, one of many lonely postings as night officer.
I'd sit at night in the cold nights with my feet in the mail bag because it was a post office. And when the trains would come from Richmond, Cloncurry and that end, I would run out to the engine and get warm near the boiler. And then as soon as they'd take water and rake out the engine, away they'd go and I'd get back into my cold office again.
Promoted to station master in the 30s, Gilbert was posted to Helidon near Toowoomba. He recalls a memorable visit by the Duke of Gloucester.
He was coming through Helidon, so the refreshment room manager there, he had a lovely garden. So he decorated the platform with hanging flowers and so on. And then when the Duke of Gloucester came, this train didn't stop, it just drew slowly through the station and went away. We were so disappointed.
Today's railway is not the one Gilbert remembers, but old habits die hard.
Well, it's your whole life when you're really in the railways because you think of it all the time, even when you're off duty.
Down in Brisbane's Fortitude Valley, once a month, a group of retired railwaymen gather to sink a few beers and recall the good days.
Yes, we used to go down the pub over in South Brisbane.
Their working days are long past, but the mateship remains.
The old steam days were far better than what they are at the present time. You didn't travel as fast. See, everything's automated now. And we were mates. Everybody helping one another. But now it's just go, go, go.
You weren't driver and fireman, you were brothers. You were brothers. You were working together to do the job. And that's the way we are now that we've retired. We're brothers.
Working in the railways isn't entirely a male domain. Maureen, Gladys and Elaine represent 3 generations of railway women. Elaine is station master at East Ipswich and an historian of women in the railways. Among the first were fettlers' wives enlisted to open gates at remote sidings.
And the railway had the policy, certainly from before 1880, of employing widows of their employees, so that anyone whose husband died on the job or as a result of an accident or illness, when the next job position came up, they were offered it. And it was a wonderful thing.
Elaine's mum Gladys raised 7 children while managing a busy country station on the Darling Downs.
Very, very difficult. Yes. I had to many a time leave the children at the house on their own, and Elaine was the elder. She was only 8 at the time. If I was kept at the station, mainly on postal work, she'd be trying to get tea on at whole 8 years old. They had a fuel stove to light up and use.
Maureen followed in her family's footsteps as a station master, but unlike them, she has the chance to do much more.
I can now just go apply for the next guards school, go through the guards course, then driver's course. So it has opened a lot more doors for me. It's some area I'd like to go into in the driving, but won't be in the far future at the moment. But yeah, we can now move onwards.
Moving on doesn't always mean relinquishing the past. Rockhampton Workshops boast a flesh and blood railway relic. Steve Vincent is one of the last railway blacksmiths. For 39 years, this smithy has crafted tools the way it was done before the turn of the century. A crowbar starts out as a block of steel, plunged into a coke-fired forge. The molten metal is then shaped using a power hammer. The basic outline is refined by hand, a job for the blacksmith striker. Then a fiery finish in a trough of oil.
Tempering makes it so it's serviceable, so it's neither brittle or too soft. So it's got a bit of hardness in it and a lot of toughness, more or less. So they're no good if they break.
Steve is passing on his smithy skills to Boilermakers. When he retires, a fragment of the railway's human heritage will live on. Next, there's a strong family thread running through the railways. Historians trace it back through generation after generation to the early railway construction camps.
Many of these people came out on ships, from the half a world away. They landed here in Queensland, processed from immigration depots, and then taken up to Ipswich, and then virtually went to where work was on the range or wherever work was often in those early days. They were strong of arm and they were large of shoulder and big of heart, and they would go out basically to tame the Queensland wilderness.
That wilderness became home to an army of pioneer labourers and their families. Conditions were Spartan. A dozen people might live in one bark humpy. Yet a rough culture thrived in the camps. There were bush dances, picnics, even poetry readings, and school lessons for the children. Meanwhile, the back-breaking work of building the railway went on. Today, fettling gangs still use the old methods in a railway competition to test skill and strength. First, ironbark sleepers form the spine of the track. Using rail tongs, the fettlers lift a 6-metre-long section of rail in place. Holding bars brace the sleeper tight against the rail, while holes for the dog spikes are hand-drilled. Hardened steel spikes are then pounded into place to secure the track. In the old days, a gang of 12 could lay 200 metres a day. It was hot, hard, brutal work. Technology has made the job a lot easier. This monster is the modern way of building Queensland's railways. Compared with the fettling gang, the fully mechanised track-laying machine puts down 4 times the length of line in a day, demolishing the old track as it goes. The old rail line is effortlessly peeled back, mechanical claws clutching at the exposed timber sleepers. Standing clear is advisable, as the machine spits the sleepers out like toothpicks. Along with ballast, they'll be recycled, mainly for landscaping. Sturdy new concrete sleepers then take their place. The gantry keeps the supply flowing as the new line is laid. When the rail is replaced, a laser eye ensures the new line is perfectly in place, ready for ballast.
The way all of the railways is heading is to heavier trains, longer trains and faster trains. And if we're going to head in that direction, then we need a better track standard. And the type of track standard that we are putting down is the quality necessary to achieve that.
Building the best railways in the world means little if the men and women who work them aren't up to speed. It takes skill to safely handle tons of rolling stock. Just as pilots are trained on aircraft simulators, so too are Queensland's train drivers. Instead of a cockpit, the simulator recreates the interior of an engine cabin, a video screen displaying the track ahead. Today, the train is travelling north from Bundaberg to Gladstone. Using the controls, a trainee gets a feeling for the powerful forces exerted during braking and accelerating.
What seems to be your trouble, Driver Simulator 1?
But the locomotive simulator can't deliver years of experience. Many drivers spend a lifetime getting to know the road. Every twist and turn of the rail line becomes second nature. Next, the railway from nowhere to nowhere. From the tropical north to the barren beauty of the outback. Trains and tourism have enjoyed a long and fruitful partnership. In the early 1900s, railway brochures promoted Queensland's winter sunshine to shivering southerners. In 1929, the railways opened a tourist shop front in Brisbane. The Tourist and Intelligence Bureau soon had branches across Queensland and interstate, the forerunner of our present tourism bodies. In the 90s, travelling for pleasure by train has never been more popular. One of the most enjoyable tourist odysseys begins in the heart of the Gulf country. the arched canopy of Normanton Railway Station looms like a mirage. Waiting inside is the Gulflander, an RM93 rail motor built in Ipswich in the 50s.
And 2 certificates. And there's,
Tourists purchase their tickets, punch the old-fashioned way, for a journey that will take them from nowhere to nowhere. The Normanton to Croydon line is isolated from the rest of the rail system. How it came to be so is a fascinating chapter in railway history. There was a time when the sleepy town of Croydon was on fire with gold rush fever. In the 1880s, Croydon's streets were literally paved with gold, studded with quartz yielding 2 ounces to the ton. A mining frenzy erupted as more than 300 gold-bearing reefs were discovered over 20 square miles. But in 1887, floods isolated the town, leaving Croydon starving. Money for a railway to Cloncurry was urgently diverted to build a line from Normanton to the goldfields. Constructing a low-cost railway across the desolate plains required ingenuity. Engineer George Phillips designed hollow steel sleepers packed with mud to do the job. They didn't need ballast, were impervious to termites, and were held fast in floodwaters. Long after timber rotted away, Phillips' invention continued to carry trains across the inland. 100 years later, the rail line brings a tourist flood to the Gulf country and a window to the outside world for those who live in this remote land.
How you going, George?
Very well, mate.
That's a lot. Yep.
Right, mate.
Yep, all clear.
Its colourful residents and the simple beauty of this landscape is a delight.
Welcome to Croydon. It's a bookmark for you. Thank you.
At Croydon, the welcoming committee includes an old-fashioned buggy ride to the town's historic hotel. The gold might be gone, but Croydon's new wealth is tourism. Muckadilla, outside Roma, is a whistle stop on the railway's long stretch to Quilpie. But once, this dot on the map was a mecca for thousands seeking a miracle. In the early 1900s, the town's artesian bore waters were hailed a natural cure for rheumatism, gout, even indigestion. The Western Mail train brought the ill and infirm to bathe in and to consume the therapeutic waters.
About the only form of therapeutic beverage that's available now in Muckadilla is one of these, served by Mitch Collins. But Mitch has got an idea that could see history come to life again. What's your principle?
Yeah, it'd be nice to see, Frank. There's at least 3 or 4 inquiries every week on it. The bore's still out there, the water's still there. Everything we need to get it in place is there.
We better go and have a look.
Sounds good.
Muckadilla's bore is situated behind Mitch's pub. It supplies water to the town's 23 residents, but it was originally owned by the railways.
It was first put down, Frank. It was the deepest ever in Australia, 3,600 feet. It was a long way in those days.
That's over a kilometre.
It's a long way.
Straight down?
Yep.
And what's the water like when it comes up?
About 44 degrees centigrade, extremely hot. Comes out with a bit of a sulphur smell about it. They did advertise back in those days that it was radioactive. It wasn't, but things were thought to be a cure-all if they were radioactive, and then...
Whatever the magic ingredient, thousands were convinced Muckadilla water had power to heal. Twice-weekly trains brought pilgrims from all over the world. 6pence, 5 cents, covered lodging at the railway hotel, along with a bath in the steaming waters.
There was a steam room. They'd wrap them in hot towels, with the nurse and attendants.
And they tell me the hot mud was a really special treatment with the chair they used to use to put them in.
Slide it down into the mud, pack the bodies with it, and bring them back out. How they got the mud off again, I'm not exactly sure.
Letters told of amazing cures.
I've seen a man crippled with rheumatism, carried from the railway station, unable to move hand or foot, and yet after 9 days' treatment he was able to play the piano.
Muckadilla was a gold mine. The railways even prepared plans to build a bigger and better spa complex. But war and improvements in medicine closed the baths in 1943. The bathhouse was bulldozed, and in 1960, fire destroyed the hotel. Yet this Lords of the Outback could live again.
You think it could be a goer?
Oh, sure it could be. There's a lot of interest these days in the alternative forms of medicine.
And of course, just the sheer tourism value of it would be marvellous.
Oh, in its own right, as well as tapping into tourism going west out to Longreach.
Happen to have with me
Good on you, mate.
a couple of pots of the Muckadilla water. When you look at it into the sun, it's almost crystal clear.
It's good clean water, there's nothing wrong with it.
Slight aroma.
Beautiful aroma, Frank.
Well, it cured them all in the old days, so here's to the future.
Okay.
Not bad. Well, we managed to survive those miracle waters of Muckadilla. I hope you'll join us next week on World Around Us for Hour 2 of The Spirit of Steam. We revisit Roma Street at the turn of the century. That's fascinating. We return to the nostalgia of those marvellous railway refreshment rooms. Then we look to the future, the incredible tilt trains that are coming, and the revival of the romantic age of steam. That's The Spirit of Steam, Part 2, World Around Us, next week. Hope we'll see you then. For now, bye-bye.